My 7-year-old granddaughter hadn't touched her birthday cake. That was the first thing I noticed. Iris loved chocolate cake. She'd been asking for it since October, and her birthday wasn't until December. My daughter-in-law, Meredith, had made it from scratch. 3 layers, buttercream frosting, little sugar roses on top. The kind of cake that should have made a 7-year-old's eyes go wide. Iris just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the tablecloth. "Pumpkin," I said, sliding the plate a little closer to her. "It's your birthday. You have to at least try the first bite." She looked up at me, and something made my chest tighten. There was no excitement in her face. No, that warm glow a kid gets when they're the center of attention. Her eyes were flat. Careful. Like she was measuring something about me before she decided how to answer. "I'm not hungry, Grandpa," she said quietly. My son, Derek, called from the other end of the table. "Iris, don't be rude. Grandpa came all the way from Cincinnati." She flinched, barely. Just a small pulling in of her shoulders, the way you'd move if you expected something to follow a raised voice. "I've been a high school guidance counselor for 31 years. I've learned to notice things other people don't." And that flinch went through me like a cold wire. "She's fine," Meredith said, laughing. "She had a lot of snacks earlier. You know how kids are." I did know how kids were. And I knew that this particular kid, who used to climb into my lap the second I walked through the door and demand I read her the same Elephant and Piggy book 4 times in a row, this kid had barely looked at me all afternoon. After dinner, I found her in the hallway, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, hugging her knees. "Hey, Bug," I said, lowering myself down to sit beside her. My knees complained about it. I ignored them. "What's going on?" She didn't answer right away. She picked at a loose thread on her sock. "Is everything okay at home?" I asked. Her body went very still. "Iris." "Grandpa," she whispered, "can I come live with you?" I felt the hallway shift under me somehow. I kept my voice even. "What do you mean, sweetheart? This is your home." She shook her head, a tiny, tight shake. "Not the house. I mean your house, your real house." "Why would you want to do that?" She looked at the carpet. Her voice dropped so low I had to lean in to hear it. "Because the storage room doesn't have a lock at your house." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "What about the storage room, Iris?" Her eyes filled up. She pressed her lips together like she was physically holding something inside. "Daddy says if I tell, something bad happens to you." A tear dropped. She didn't wipe it. "He says bad things happen to people who make him sad." I heard Meredith in the kitchen, running water, humming something. I heard Derek laughing at something on his phone. The birthday balloons in the living room rustled in the heat from the vent. "Nothing bad is going to happen to me," I said. I wrapped my hand around hers. It was so small. "I promise you, but I need you to tell me." She shook her head again, but she didn't let go of my hand. "Daddy said I have to sleep in there sometimes," she whispered, "so I can be there when he needs me. I am not a man who cries easily. I spent 3 decades listening to teenagers tell me things that would make most people's blood run cold. I learned a long time ago to be the calm one in the room, because panicking helps no one. But sitting on that hallway floor, holding my granddaughter's hand, I felt something in me crack clean in half. Meredith called from the kitchen, "Iris, honey, come help me cut the cake." Iris looked at me. Not the excited way a kid looks at cake. The way someone looks at a door they're not sure is safe to go through. "It's okay," I told her. "Go ahead. I'll be right here." I watched her walk down the hall, this small person in her birthday dress, and I made a decision that I knew would change everything. I did not sleep that night. Not 1 hour. I lay in the guest room of their house, staring at the ceiling, and I went back over everything I knew about my son. Derek was 41 years old. He worked in insurance, regional sales manager, good money, nice car, the house in the suburbs outside Columbus with the 2-car garage, and the neighborhood with the HOA. He coached Iris's soccer team in the fall. He was on the church finance committee. He was the kind of man who other people called a stand-up guy. I thought about the past 2 years. How Meredith had started making excuses when I suggested visits. how they'd stopped coming to Cincinnati for Thanksgiving, how Iris had changed. And I'd told myself I was imagining it. I told myself she was just going through a phase that kids went through phases. I hadn't let myself think further than that. Because he was my son. And there are things you don't want to think about your son. By 4 a.m, I'd stopped making excuses for myself. I drove home to Cincinnati on Sunday. I told Derek I had an early appointment Monday, which was true. What I did not tell him was that the appointment was with a family attorney. Her name was Rebecca Townsend. She'd been recommended by a colleague at the school district. She was 60, precise. With reading glasses she kept taking on and off, and she did not waste any time once I started talking. You need to report this to Franklin County Children's Services today, she told me. Not tomorrow. Today. What your granddaughter described is sufficient for a mandatory investigation. I don't have proof of anything, I said. Just what she told me. Children's disclosures are proof. You don't need physical evidence to make a report. That's what the investigation is for. And my son. She looked at me steadily. Mr. Aldridge, I understand what I'm asking you to sit with, but the law is clear and so is your obligation, especially given your professional background. She was right. In Ohio, I was a mandatory reporter. I've been for 30 years. I'd made those calls before. About other people's children. About strangers. I'd never imagined I would have to make one about my own family. I made the call that afternoon. The investigator assigned to Iris's case was a woman named Specialist Denise Okafor from Franklin County DCFS. She was thorough and quiet, and she asked me to write out everything Iris had said, word for word, as close as I could remember. I did. She told me not to contact Derek or Meredith, not to return to the house, not to say anything to Iris that could be construed as coaching. She told me an investigator would make contact within 48 hours. Those 48 hours were the longest of my life. I went to school on Monday. I sat in my office and I listened to a junior tell me he was failing 2 classes, and I gave him the best advice I could, and then I walked to the men's room and stood at the sink with the water running and held the edge of the counter until my knuckles were white because I needed something solid to hold on to. On Tuesday afternoon, Denise Okafor called me. "We've made contact," she said. "Iris has been interviewed by a forensic specialist. I can't share details of the investigation, but I can tell you that we've taken protective action." What does that mean? It means Iris is safe. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen. I didn't plan to. My legs just stopped. What came out over the following days was terrible. The forensic interview, conducted by a specialist trained specifically to work with child victims, produced disclosure that was, according to the investigator, consistent, detailed, and unprompted. A medical examination corroborated what Iris had said. A search of the house turned up a locked storage room off the basement with a padlock on the outside, a camera on a shelf, and a locked file cabinet with contents that I was told, in the careful language of official reports, were deeply disturbing. Derek had been doing this for at least 2 years, possibly longer. Meredith, the woman I had eaten Thanksgiving dinner with, the woman who had made my granddaughter a 3-layer birthday cake, had known. She had not participated, the investigation determined. But she had known, and she had said nothing. And she had kept bringing Iris back to that house every single day. In Ohio, that is a crime. Failure to protect a child. She was arrested the same day Derek was. I am not going to tell you I handled any of this with dignity. I did not. I went through a period of 2 or 3 weeks where I was barely functional. I had spent 31 years telling students that it's never your fault when someone hurts you. And I spent those weeks asking myself how I had missed this for 2 years. What signs I had walked past. What I had chosen not to see because seeing it would have meant accepting something I couldn't accept. My therapist, who I started seeing in January, tells me this is a normal part of processing betrayal by someone you love. She uses words like compartmentalization and cognitive dissonance. I appreciate the words. I'm not sure they make it easier. What made it easier was Iris. She was placed in emergency foster care initially, with a family in Columbus. I immediately began the process to become her guardian. Ohio's kinship placement process is thorough. Background checks, home study, interviews, training requirements. I am a 63-year-old widower living alone in a 3-bedroom house in Cincinnati. I did not know when I started whether they would consider me suitable. The social worker assigned to Iris, a young man named Patrick Slade, was honest with me from the beginning. The goal is always to place children with family when possible and appropriate, he told me. Your background, your profession, your relationship with Iris. These are all factors in your favor. But it takes time. It took 4 months. I drove to Columbus on a Thursday in April to pick her up. She was waiting in Patrick's office with a backpack and a stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 2. She called it Peanut. I'd given it to her. When she saw me, she didn't run. She walked over slowly, and she put her arms around my waist, and she pressed her face into my side, and she stood there for a long time without saying anything. I put my hand on the back of her head, and I didn't say anything either. Some moments don't need words. The drive back to Cincinnati was 3 hours. For the first hour, she slept. For the second, she looked out the window and asked me about a dozen small questions. Did I still have the bird feeder in the backyard? Could she have the room with the yellow curtains? Was the dog across the street still there, the brown one? I answered every one. In the third hour, she said, "Grandpa?" "Yeah, Bug." "Did you know? Before my birthday?" I kept my hands on the wheel. "No," I said. "I didn't know. But I should have seen something sooner. And I'm sorry I didn't." She thought about that for a while. My friend at the foster house said it's not my fault. And her therapist said it's not her fault either. "That's right," I said. "It's not your fault. None of it." "Then it's not your fault either," she said with the absolute matter-of-fact certainty that children sometimes have. The kind that cuts right through all the complicated things adults build up around the truth. I didn't trust my voice for a little while after that. The first night in my house, she woke up screaming at 2 in the morning. I went to her room and turned on the lamp and sat on the edge of her bed and talked to her quietly until she stopped shaking. It happened again at 4. I stayed in the chair in the corner of her room until morning. Her therapist, Dr. Lenora Bridges, specialized in childhood trauma. We saw her twice a week for the first 3 months, once a week after that. Dr. Bridges gave me reading material, frameworks, language to use. She told me to expect regression, nightmares, moments where Iris would test me, push against every boundary she could find, waiting to see if I'd push back hard or walk away. She warned me that trauma changes a child's nervous system, that Iris's brain had been wired to expect danger, and that rewiring it required consistency above everything else. I am not a perfect guardian. I am a 63-year-old man who raised 2 sons and thought he knew something about parenting. And I learned very quickly that I knew almost nothing about this kind of parenting. I made mistakes. I said the wrong thing sometimes. Once I raised my voice about something ridiculous. She'd left the back door open and the cat got out. And I watched her face go blank and still in a way that told me exactly what that raised voice meant to her nervous system. And I sat down on the kitchen floor and apologized until she sat down next to me. We found the cat 3 houses over, by the way. She was fine. The legal proceedings took the better part of a year. Derek hired a defense attorney who argued that the evidence had been mishandled, that Iris's disclosure was the product of a leading interview, that the physical evidence was subject to an alternative explanation. The forensic specialist who interviewed Iris took the stand and dismantled every one of those arguments methodically and without apparent emotion, the way a surgeon removes something that doesn't belong. Iris did not have to testify in the criminal trial. The physical evidence and Meredith's plea agreement, she agreed to testify against Derek in exchange for a reduced charge, were sufficient. I was grateful for that. Dr. Septu Bridges had told me that for children Iris's age, courtroom testimony, even in protected settings, could re-traumatize in ways that set back recovery significantly. Meredith received 4 years. A lot of the people around me felt that was inadequate. Honestly, I did too. She stood in that courtroom and said she had been afraid of Derek, that he'd controlled every aspect of her life, that she'd believed if she spoke up something terrible would happen to her or to Iris. I believe some of that was true. I also believe that every morning for 2 years she drove my granddaughter to school, knowing what was happening, and drove her home again, knowing where she was going. 4 years. I've made a kind of peace with it because I have to. Because carrying rage around takes energy I'd rather spend on Iris. Derek received 37 years. With sentencing enhancements for the duration and nature of the abuse, the judge noted that the documented evidence, the camera, the organized files, the lock on the outside of the door, indicated deliberate, premeditated, ongoing predation against a child in his care. He will not be eligible for parole for 25 years. He'll be in his late 60s when he has even the possibility of release. He looked at me once during sentencing. Just once. I don't know what he was looking for. I looked back and I didn't recognize him. That's been the strangest part of all of this. Not the grief, exactly, but the disorientation. I keep finding photographs from years ago. Derek at 12, catching his first fish at a lake in Michigan. Derek at his college graduation. Derek holding Iris in the hospital the day she was born, looking down at her with an expression I had thought was love. I don't know what to do with those photographs. I haven't thrown them away. I haven't looked at them in months. My younger son, Wesley, lives in Portland. He flew in the week after the arrest and stayed for 10 days. He and I didn't talk much about Derek, not directly. We talked around it, the way you talk around a room you're not ready to go into. He said once, quietly. I should have seen something too. I told him what I tell myself, what Dr. Bridges tells me. You can only act on what you know. He didn't look like he believed it either. Iris started second grade in September at an elementary school 4 blocks from my house. She walked in on the first day wearing a backpack covered in planets and moons, which she had picked out herself at the school supplies section of Target with great seriousness and deliberation. And she told me that morning that her class was going to do a whole unit on space. And did I know that Jupiter had 95 moons? I told her I did not know that. She told me several other things about Jupiter as we walked to school. She held my hand. That was a good day. There have been hard days since then. There will be more. Dr. Bridges has been honest with me about the long arc of trauma recovery. It's not a straight line, and it doesn't have an endpoint exactly. There are children who carry this into adulthood and struggle for decades. The goal is to give Iris the tools to carry it without being crushed by it. Some days she has those tools, some days she doesn't, some days I don't either. What I have learned in this past year is that I cannot change what was done to my granddaughter. I cannot take back the 2 years I didn't look closely enough. I cannot unhear what she told me on that hallway floor, or unsee the reports I was given afterward. Those things are in me now, permanently. I carry them. What I can control is what comes next. Last spring, Iris drew a picture in art class. Her teacher called me to come see it before it went up on the wall. It was a picture of 2 people holding hands, one tall and one small, standing in front of a house with a yellow door. The teacher said Iris had told the class it was her grandpa's house, and that yellow was her favorite color for doors because it meant someone wanted you to come inside. I had the door painted yellow the following weekend. It's a small thing. It's also not a small thing. 3 months ago, the Family Advocacy Center that had worked with Iris's case called to ask if Iris would be willing, with my permission and guidance, to record a short message for other children, something the center could use in their outreach programs. Dr. Bridges and I discussed it carefully. We discussed it with Iris. It was her decision entirely. She said yes. She recorded it on a Saturday afternoon, sitting in a chair in a warm room, and this is what she said. Hi. I'm Iris. I'm 8 years old. For a long time I was scared to tell anyone what was happening to me because I thought if I told, worse things would happen. But I told my grandpa, and he listened, and he believed me, and he didn't let anything bad happen. If someone is hurting you and telling you to keep a secret, that's not a secret you have to keep. Tell someone. Tell a teacher or a school counselor or another grown-up you trust. Keep telling until someone listens. I'm okay now. You can be okay too. The Advocacy Center coordinator called me the following month. She said 2 children had made disclosures after watching Iris's video. I sat with that for a long time. The formal guardianship became permanent adoption last October. We went to the Franklin County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning. Iris wore a dress with foxes on it because she had recently decided foxes were her favorite animal. The judge was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who asked Iris if she understood what was happening and what she wanted. "Grandpa is going to be my real dad now," she said, "except I'm still going to call him Grandpa because that's his name." The judge said he thought that was a reasonable arrangement. In the car afterwards, Iris asked if we could go to the Science Museum and look at the space exhibit, because she had been promised this trip for 2 weeks and she wanted to see the Jupiter's display in particular. I said yes. We went. She stood in front of a scale model of the solar system for 20 minutes and explained things to me that I mostly didn't understand. I understood the important thing, which was that she was standing there. I think about that hallway floor a lot. The carpet was beige, the kind builders put in when they're not really thinking about it, and Iris had been sitting with her back against the wall, pulling at a thread on her sock, and she looked up at me like she was calculating whether I was safe. I have thought about what would have happened if I had told myself she was just tired, just going through a phase, just being a kid. I have thought about driving home to Cincinnati and letting the discomfort I felt that day settle into something I eventually stopped thinking about. It would have been so easy. That's what I couldn't have told you before all of this, and what I can tell you now. It would have been so easy to not see it. Here is what I know. Children tell you the truth in pieces, obliquely, sideways, because they have usually been taught that the direct route is dangerous. When a child tells you a room frightens them, when a child flinches at a voice, when a child who used to be warm and open looks at you like they're measuring the risk of trusting you, those are pieces of something. They deserve to be taken seriously. You don't need certainty before you make a call. You don't need proof. That is what the investigation is for. What you need is enough concern to pick up the phone. The professionals on the other end of that call have been trained to figure out the rest. I know it's harder when it's family. I know it can feel like a betrayal, like blowing up something that can't be rebuilt. But the thing I have learned is that by the time there's something to report, the damage is already being done. You are not the one doing the damage by speaking up. You are the one trying to stop it. Iris is 9 now. She is studying for a math test this week, which she is furious about because math is, in her words, a lot. She has a best friend named Chloe who comes over on Saturdays and they build elaborate structures out of the Lego sets that have taken over the dining room table. She still sees Dr. Bridges once a month. She still has nights that are hard. And this morning, she came downstairs in her school uniform with Peanut the elephant tucked under her arm. She is 9 and she still carries that elephant sometimes, and I hope she carries it for as long as she needs to, and she sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Grandpa, can you make the eggs with the crispy parts?" She means the ones I cook in too much butter until the edges get lacy and brown. I made the eggs. We sat at the table, and she told me about the math test, and about the Lego project she and Chloe were planning, and about how 95 is a lot of moons for one planet. I agreed that it was a lot of moons. Then she picked up her backpack and her lunch and she went to school. And I stood in the kitchen for a minute after the door closed, in the quiet house with the yellow door, and I thought about how close I came to not knowing any of this. Not the hard parts. I could have done without those. Gladly. But this. The eggs and the elephant and the 95 moons. If you see something, say something. Not because it's easy. Not because it won't cost you. But because somewhere there is a child sitting in a hallway on a beige carpet, calculating whether you're safe enough to tell. Be safe enough to tell. I keep coming back to that beige carpet. The loose thread on Iris's sock. The way she looked up at me like she was running a calculation. Is this person safe enough? Is this the one? Do I tell him, or do I keep carrying this alone? She was 7 years old, and she had already learned to calculate that. What I understand now, that I didn't understand before, is that the people who failed Iris didn't fail her all at once. It happened in small choices, spread out over years. Derek made choices. Meredith made choices. And I made choices too. Every time I told myself she was just going through a phase. Every time I let the discomfort of a thought settle into something I stopped examining. None of us did nothing. We all did something. The question was always what we chose to do with what we saw. That's the part that stays with me. The cause and the consequence aren't always close together in time. You make a small choice to look away. And 2 years later, a child is sitting on a hallway floor in her birthday dress pulling at a thread on her sock because she has run out of ways to carry what she's carrying. The chain connects. It always connects. I spent 31 years as a guidance counselor telling young people that character isn't what you do when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you something. I believe that. I taught it. And then I sat in a car outside a family attorney's office in January, hands on the steering wheel, and I understood for the first time what it actually means to act on it. Turning Derek in meant destroying the version of my family I had spent 40 years building in my head. It meant my son's arrest, my granddaughter in foster care, my younger son on the first flight from Portland with no idea what to say, my own face on the other side of a courtroom from someone I raised. It cost everything I thought I knew about my life. And it was still the only right thing to do. Not because the outcome was guaranteed, not because I knew it would work out. I didn't know that. I made the call when I didn't know. That's the only time making the call means anything. When you're not sure, when you're scared, when the cost is visible and real. What Iris gave me, without knowing she was giving it to me, is a kind of clarity I don't think I could have arrived at any other way. She sat in Dr. Paula Bridges' office twice a week, and she did the work of understanding something that most adults will spend a lifetime avoiding. That what happened to her was not a reflection of her worth. That pain doesn't equal guilt. That healing requires you to be honest about what hurt you before you can move past it. She did that at 7, 8, 9 years old. She is still doing it. And watching her do it has made me braver in my own smaller ways, quicker to say the hard thing, slower to let discomfort be a reason for silence. I think about the 2 children who made disclosures after hearing Iris's video. I don't know their names. I don't know what happened to them after, but I know that those disclosures happened because Iris decided to speak. And Iris decided to speak because I decided to act, and I decided to act because she trusted me enough to calculate that I was safe. Everything flows from that one moment on the carpet. Everything. The eggs with the crispy edges, the yellow door, 95 moons. Be the person someone can calculate as safe.